Nicole, you are with I-24 News, and the coverage you've been doing this week on the ground in Israel, it has gone viral. People have seen this coverage all over the world, and there's some elements we're going to get into in a moment here. But I want to just ask, as a journalist and a human being who is on the ground, seeing and processing some of these unthinkable things, what has this been like for you this week?
It's incredibly difficult to be on the scene of some of these massacres. Really, that's what it is. So as a journalist, and I'm with dozens of other journalists on the ground, but as difficult as it is for us to see the aftermath of these scenes, there are families and citizens and residents and soldiers that witnessed it firsthand and witnessed it as it was happening. So I never thought I would be in this position where I'm reporting mere feet away from death. But I think it needs to be done, and people need to see the images and the footage that's happening out of here, because, as I said, those other Israelis are experiencing it firsthand. And so, if as journalists, if we don't show it, then no one knows what's truly happening. But unfortunately, to show it, you also have to see it firsthand.
And that is a difficult thing to process, because you're a human being walking into this. A lot of journalists, people view journalists as sort of conveying information, but in order to convey it, as you said, you have to process it and see it. And you had a report this week that went viral. It stunned a lot of people, and it had to do with a slaughter in which Hamas killed babies. There were 40 babies who were killed. And in the report, the fact is, you mentioned that there were IDF soldiers who told you that some of those babies had been decapitated. And it's so horrific to even talk about. And yet here we are having to do that. Let's talk first about what you saw and experienced at that site. Let's just go there. Take us through some of what you saw and experienced and what the soldiers told you.
It was difficult walking through as we were guided by the Israeli military. And this was a scene, a kibbutz community, kibbutz Kfar Aza, that had just been liberated. Within hours, they had just finished fighting Hamas terrorists. So the military, even as we were going through this community, they were still going door to door, house to house, clearing the bodies from this community. There were some houses that we weren't allowed to go near because there were still mines or booby traps that had been placed in there. So we would get near a scene and they would say, you have to step back because that could explode at any moment. As you're walking through these communities, you see destruction everywhere. Not only are bodies still lining these communities, the Israeli military trying to rush ahead of us to cover the Israeli bodies. Meanwhile, Hamas terrorists' bodies, there are dozens of them, riddle the former playgrounds and parks and community areas of this kibbutz. But there are also, saw a stroller that was stained with blood, a crib overturned on its side, taken outside of the door. This was in front of the house now. The crib overturned, splattered with blood, a child's toy still inside. So when you're looking at these gruesome, horrific images and hearing from the soldiers firsthand, the deputy commander, one of the first people to arrive at the scene on Saturday, and as he's arriving at the scene with the rest of his troops, actively fighting terrorists, going door to door, actively fighting these Hamas terrorists who infiltrated into the community from maybe a quarter of a mile away from the Gaza Strip. While they're fighting, they're being surrounded by this scene of a massacre. So that was also very difficult for them. And I think it's interesting because people don't realize, I'm a journalist, as you said, as you are too. I moved here 8 months ago to cover news in the Middle East, in Israel and the surrounding area. I'm doing my job on the ground. If I was doing this covering a war in Ukraine, let's say, for example, and I was speaking to firsthand witnesses, along with showing the footage of the aftermath, would anyone be doubting these scenes? If I was reporting on this in my own home in the United States, speaking to American soldiers who were first to arrive at the scene, talking about this massacre, along with showing the images of the massacre. So although we're not showing the images of the dead bodies, you see the blood stains, you see the scenes of the attack, and you hear from people who experienced it. So the fact that people are doubting these soldiers is
it's, I mean, you were told this by soldiers. It's interesting to me that the decapitation piece of this is such a sticking point, as though killing 40 babies in some other form would be ever acceptable in any way, right? But the reality is numerous stories, casting doubt that this is unconfirmed. And the way that these stories frame it, and I wanted to get your reaction to this piece of it, is that, oh, well, that at first Israel was saying this happened, but now they're kind of backing away from it. They're not willing to confirm it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you were just sort of hinting at maybe why that is, with the images, but just react to that a little for me.
And now, unfortunately, Israel Foreign Ministry has released some of these images of burnt babies, of babies covered in blood. Now they've released these images as of yesterday. And so I'm wondering why people needed to see this, if the other footage from the ground wasn't enough. And so we do have confirmation from separate Israeli sources. We continue to hear even now from American sources, U.S. Secretary of Defense Antony Blinken saying that he's seen some of these images with his own eyes. And so the fact that this continues to be corroborated, and as you said, the form which they were slaughtered, murdered, and the people that we spoke to on the ground said it was guns, it was knives, it was grenades. So if later it comes out that these soldiers, what they witnessed, they misspoke, and it turns out the baby's head wasn't cut off, it was shot off. This is a dismembered child we're talking about. So the life is lost, and that's what people need to focus on. And also, this is just one community. We continue, as this continues to develop, and they continue to go community to community in the South and continue to clear the bodies and recover these communities, we're hearing more horror stories. I heard one story yesterday from one of the people who goes in and clears the bodies. And he said he found a pregnant woman who was shot in the head, her stomach sliced open, the baby still attached to the umbilical cord, and the baby was stabbed with a knife. And he's asking himself, which came first?
Wow. As we round out to a close here, because this is, even you sharing that, you get chills hearing these stories. You are conveying them through I-24 News, right? You are talking to these people, both in that instance that you just described, and when it comes to the soldiers who were telling you about the decapitations and the murders. These are human beings who are witnessing and seeing these things. What was their emotional state as they were conveying these stories to you?
They're very emotional and in shock also, because as they're describing this, it's never a statement that I thought I would say. These are never words that I thought would come out of my mouth. They're never words I thought I would hear, because these are acts I didn't know were humanly capable, that someone was humanly capable of committing. And I think these first response teams, these soldiers, are feeling the same way. And as heartbroken as they are, they're also angered and they are furious. And the soldiers and the community, it's definitely, Israel is coming together with a broken heart, but they're continuing to fight back, and it's making the community stronger from what I've seen. And people need to remember that here in Israel, it's everyone on the front lines are coming together, whether it's Jews, Christians, Muslims, Arabs. It's not just the Jewish people in Israel. This is a wide community. And when people are looking at this, I think it's important to realize everyone who is coming together here in Israel, everyone in Israel is speaking out against these atrocious acts. So why is the rest of the world not speaking out against these acts?
Well, Nicole, I appreciate you taking the time, bringing us through this. I'm sorry you're in a position too of having to then rehash it and talk about it, but I think it's important that we do discuss that these are things that are happening and that we break these issues down so that people really, as you were just saying, understand the gravity and the horror of what is happening there. And we would love to have you back as this situation unfolds.
Of course, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Billy.